Thank you, Deb. Thank you, Deb. I said that again so they could hear it too, Deb. Um, my name is Jeff, and I am an alcoholic. And I always say my name is Jeff because to say that I'm Jeff is so limiting. And AA is about me no longer being limited by the things that used to limit me. Uh, it- the whole point. This is a spiritual program, and by the way, anyone who is keeping the score, I am not an expert on Alcoholics Anonymous. I am an expert on me. I've had to become one because I was I did not know how to live life when I got here, and it took me many years of being here in AA before I began to get a handle on what the hell's going on here and what the hell I'm doing here. But I have a pretty good line on it now. I I have an idea of what my life is about, and I have a way on a daily basis to live my life in the direction of what my life is about. And what my life is about is, as I said, being free of limitations so that I can become more and more the expression of life that God wants me to be.
Jeff, I'm going to interrupt you just momentarily. Is it possible to turn your volume up from your computer on your mic?
Yeah, I can. Tell me how's that? Is that better? Okay. You all heard that my name is Jeff and I'm an alcoholic, right? You heard that part? Okay. Um, I from my experience and my observation and my studies, I believe that alcoholism is a is at least the tendency toward it is hereditary. I know that I was eating sugar addictively when I was a kid. I lit my first cigarette when I was 4.5 years old. You got to know something's going on there. Um, my mother did smoke when I was in utero, so that might have something to do with it. I'm a child of the '50s, and there was less understanding of healthy choices at that time. And my mother had a lot to deal with. My father was an alcoholic, and he was a veteran of World War II, and he suffered from extraordinary PTSD. They didn't call it that then. It was just, my dad disappeared for a few days at a time to take care of whatever it was he had to take care of, and the rest of us adjusted. And then for me, I found that I looked forward to being able to affect the way I felt. Um, I felt things really deeply, really intensively, and I watched people have a drink, and I watched them be able to take a breath. I watched people have a cigarette and be able to calm down. I watched people who were having a hard time with each other or with themselves, and they would have a drink and a cigarette, and things got better. And I couldn't wait to do that myself. And so, I started drinking as soon as I could. And when I was kicked out of school along with several other people when I was, I don't know, 13, I think, for being drunk at the Sadie Hawkins dance. I was the only freshman. But my grandmother at the time said, "Oh, I watched him stealing drinks from family gatherings long before this." And apparently, I was always trying to have a drink. Um, and apparently, alcohol affects me differently than it does my fellows. Um, once it when people say I stopped drinking because I started to feel it, that doesn't make sense to me. What makes sense to me is I started to feel it. I want more of that feeling. And searching for more of that feeling usually led to bad behavior, or throwing up in the bushes, or passing out, making bad choices. And then when I was 15 years old, I was involved in a car accident. I was driving, I wasn't drinking, I wasn't breaking the law, but someone died. And it was a legitimate accident, but I saw myself from that moment forward as a murderer, unworthy of life, unworthy of love. And I tried to kill myself a few times, and I didn't know how to do it. I couldn't do it. I know now that life had plans for me, that life itself is what I am. I think I'm this guy named Jeff, but what I am is life, or an expression of God, or an experience of consciousness. These are all different ways of saying the same thing. It's not about my individuality, and yet I was constrained to experiencing myself through my individuality. I'm this guy with these problems, with these issues, with this history. People think of me this way. I think of myself this way. And because of X, Y, and Z, I have to feel A, B, and C. And all of these ideas made me small and constrained and in agony constantly. I was in self-induced hell for years and years and years. And I was a middle-class farm boy who was smart, and I had a track that I was supposed to go down. My sister, just a couple days ago, she's the one who stayed back in Montana, and there's a text thread for her and myself and our two other sisters. So whenever something comes through on that thread, I know someone died. And she sent a picture of Mr. Glock, and Mr. Glock's holding up a couple of fish, and she says, "You remember this guy, Mr. Glock?" And one of my sisters said, "Oh yeah, he was the guidance counselor." And I said, "Oh yeah, I never spoke to him because I didn't deserve to have guidance." And because no one could guide me because of who I thought myself to be, which was just wrong, just bad. The shame that I felt about being alive was stupefying. And the only thing that calmed it down was a drink. And then later it was drugs and drinking. And most of the drugs I did were in order to drink more. Still, I never thought of myself as an alcoholic. That was my father. And I stumbled through life. I joined the carnival. I hitchhiked around. I worked in a factory. I worked on a farm. I did, I cleaned up people's garbage. I scrubbed toilets. I did all sorts of different things. And I tried to go to college and, fell out of that. And I stumbled around and found a career path that began to work for me, and I came up with the idea that if I got a job in this career that was of a certain level, that the inside of my head would stop eating me alive, that it would be fixed, it would settle into, I don't know, I thought what's wrong with me is going to be fixed by changing something out here. And it sounds insane when I say it, but our whole culture tells us this. If you just get enough money or the right kind of love or enough love, or you have these children, you have a house, you get a job, enough of all these things, you're going to be okay. And I literally had to find a way to be okay, and nothing I did seemed to help. And I tried lots of different things, lots of different self-help programs, lots of different spiritual books and spiritual practices, the therapy, all sorts of things. And I just thought success is going to fix me. And I was on track to get this job, and these guys who were supposed to give me the job, or who would give me the job if it was going to be my job, I was with them, and we'd already done everything that would determine if they were going to hire me or not, and they started talking about something else, and I just said, "Come on, man, what do I have the job or not?" And I just closed my eyes so I could watch the inside of my head change. And they said, "Yeah, yeah, you got the job," and nothing happened. It wasn't that it didn't change enough; it's that it didn't change at all. Nothing changed. It was still the same super ego or alcoholic ego or negative voice in my head just telling me you suck, you should die, and all different permutations of that. And I went out that night and tried to get drunk to celebrate, and I couldn't get the click. I couldn't get drunk anymore. The alcohol didn't work for me. I did a bunch of drugs. The drugs didn't work for me. Nothing. I could no longer get away from my head. And this frightened me more than I think anything because it was the one thing that had never let me down. Alcohol had always done for me what I needed it to do. And I had developed a way of drinking just enough at the right time and then making it work for myself and uh, having it be a part of my life. And now it stopped working. And I worked a couple of weeks on this job, and then it was the Christmas holidays, and I just determined, I realized I was going to screw up this job if I didn't stop drinking and getting high, even though it's no longer worked for me, and I determined to get clean. And so I did what I knew how to do, which was I checked into a hotel and sweated and shook for 3 days and drank a bunch of water and faded in and out of consciousness. Um, and this was December 30th, 1985. And as I was coming back from this hotel, I thought this was really a bad idea. I can't go through life feeling like this. I need a drink. And I just thought, okay, I'm going to go to the gym, I'm going to work out, and then I'll have a drink. And I went to the gym, and I was trying to get on an exercise bicycle, and it wasn't cooperating with me. The stirrup just kept spinning around, and my foot wouldn't go into it. And this woman on the next bicycle finally took off her Walkman. This is for the younger ones in the room. The Walkman is what we used to listen to before we had iPhones. And she took off her Walkman headset and said, "Excuse me, are you okay?" And, and I said, "Oh, this is just the effect of no chemicals in my system. I'm sure it'll pass." And she said, "I haven't had any chemicals in my system for a year and a half. I go to these meetings. They seem to help." And I said, "It is so good that people like you have a place to go." And, I took her number for whatever reason, and I went home, and for some reason, I didn't drink that night. And the next day, I was literally climbing the walls, and I called this woman, and she had me meet her at a meeting. And I went to this meeting, and I was terrified. And all I remember is sweating and shaking and massive faces looming out of the fog at me with teeth smiling and hands thrust out at me that I had to deal with. And it was all I got in the back of the room with my back against the wall and just hoped people wouldn't come toward me. And there was one woman I had worked with who came up to me at that meeting. Her name is Aloma. And she threw her arms around me and said, "We've been saving a seat for you." And, I realized much later that that woman saved my life because I was someone who didn't belong anywhere. And this woman said, "I see you. I see what's going on with you. I have the same thing, and you belong here." And because she was beautiful, because she was talented, because I respected her, and because she took it upon herself to speak to me in such an open, welcoming, vulnerable way, I took it seriously and I allowed it to convince me that I could stay. And these people took me to another meeting the next morning, and they took me to another meeting the next night, and they said, "We got another one tomorrow morning." And I said, "Oh my God, you guys go to a lot of these meetings, don't you?" And I went to another meeting Sunday morning, and I went to another meeting Sunday night. And on Monday, I went to work, and I was terrified, but I was sober. And I just prayed and prayed and prayed and prayed and prayed and prayed and then worked, and then just I felt like my skin had been torn off and the wind was blowing sand against me. But I was able to live with that and not have a drink. And at the end of the first week of work, after I stopped drinking, I was working with some people who were famous junkies, and they invited me to a party in Laurel Canyon. And I thought, yeah, okay, I've been staying in touch with these AA people, and I can get a 6-pack of Diet Coke. I can go up to the canyon. I'll be fine. And but yeah, they're junkies, but I was never a junkie. And I got home, and this was, this we had answering machines in those days, and there was a light blinking on my answering machine, and this woman who had taken me to a meeting said, "Hey, we just got done with the meeting. We're going to Hugo's if you want to meet us for something to eat." And by the grace of God, I went to Hugo's restaurant instead of up Laurel Canyon with my Diet Coke between me and certain death. And I was in a state of grace, and it didn't feel like I would imagine a state of grace would feel like. I would imagine a state of grace would be, oh, thank God I'm home. Instead, it felt like I still don't belong anywhere, and it is sheer agony for me to be here and alive on the planet, and I'm not having a drink. And that's the way it was for me for quite a while. But in those first couple of weeks, I heard enough that I knew I had to stay, and I stayed. And somewhere in there, I started doing the things that we do to guarantee our staying, which is, I asked a guy to be my sponsor, and he said, "No, I'm not taking any sponsees on." I said, "No, you're my sponsor." And I just kept following him around until he agreed to be my sponsor. I don't know why. He was just, I picked him out. You know why? Because the first time I heard him speak, he talked about having a spiritual awakening. I don't know what that is, but I want it, because anything's got to be better than what I got going on here. And he finally agreed to be my sponsor. And, for better or for worse, there are stories I could tell you. One thing I will tell you is that when I did get to my fifth step, the one thing that he told me that was terribly healing for me was, after I shared some of my sexual shenanigans, he said, "That's nothing. I once woke up in bed with another man, a woman, and a boa constrictor." And I said, "Oh, okay." you got me beat there. So it made it okay for me to be me. But I got a sponsor. I got commitments. I got like 3 commitments a week. I went to meetings. I forced myself to open my mouth and speak what was inside of me. And we had these meetings. They were called Architects of Adversity meetings. And they started sometime in the 40s. And the preamble says these are sometimes called fifth step meetings, because the format is you can say whatever it is you need to say to stay sober today. And so, but if you look at the title, it took me years before I started understanding what it is. We're architects of adversity. That means we're building our own bad experience. And so in these meetings, there were people throwing chairs, there were people throwing ashtrays, it was just mayhem. And it was about the way the inside of my head sounded, so I felt comfortable there. And it gave me a chance to build resentments and walk through them because, oh, son of a bitch isn't calling on me, And and there were at least two or three times when in these meetings I just said, I'm done. I hate all of you. I hate this program. I'm going to drink. I'm stopping at Turner's Liquor on the way home. I'm getting a six-pack and a pint of whiskey, and screw you all. And I would get done talking, and everyone would just applaud and raise their hands. No one cared. It was because it was being held in a place where, not like a padded room, but where you couldn't hurt yourself. And there's a teacher by the name of David Hawkins who was sober over 50 years when he passed away. And he was a psychiatrist who, had an enlightenment experience. And he spoke about the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous with this singleness of purpose. All of us coming together forms a field of unconditional love that when we enter it, we become able to make choices for ourselves that on our own we're not able to make. So I come in and I'm held by all of you, and when I speak all of that stuff that feels like poison inside of me, it's not that you take it on, but it's that this field that we form by being together dissolves it, because it's not darkness and ugliness. It's just a place where light has not yet been shown. And this field of unconditional love, that's a field of light that we form simply by coming together and saying, it's Tuesday night, this time to this time, we're going to all be together, and we're going to be here in order to not have a drink today. And all the other stuff we come to meetings for, but we come together in order to remind each other that we're in this thing, and remind each other that it's possible, and offer each other the opportunity to pay attention to something other than the inside of our heads for 1 hour. And the big book tells us that the Fellowship of Alcohol, it's in the, I believe it's the Vision for You. It says, is there no substitute for the peace and comfort that we once got from having a drink? And yes, there is. And it's the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. And that's what we offer each other by coming together like this. And I was able to use the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous to go just one more day of how awful it felt to be me. And then, having sobriety, I was able to begin to start working the steps. And the steps, in my understanding and my reading of the literature, have one function, and that is to offer me a spiritual awakening. Step 12 says, having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps. We try to carry this message to other alcoholics and practice these principles in all of our affairs. And I began working the steps, and I had enough of a personality change that is talked about in the literature to not have a drink, but I was miserable for many, many years. And, when I was 17 years sober, I woke up one day and I just said, and this was after, I'll tell you, I went away. This is a pattern of mine. I go someplace to figure out my life. I went away to Del Mar and checked into a hotel to get sober. And I was 17 years sober, and I went away to India to figure out how to stay in my marriage and how to, how to just how to get happy with my life, how to stop being so miserable all the time. And while I was there, I had an experience, and my at the same time I was having my experience, my wife was having another experience, and I came home from India and she was pregnant. And it was not immaculate conception, and I'd been gone for a couple of months, so you can do the math. And uh, and I just kept going to Alcoholics Anonymous and sharing about it, and a series of misadventures occurred, and I was sleeping on the basement of a sponsee's. I was sleeping in the basement of a sponsee's house, and on a blow up mattress on the floor. I'd lost everything. Uh, my television, my large screen TV fell on top of my Martin guitar, smashing both of them. And my poor little Boston Terrier was eaten by coyotes. And I went to a meeting, and I shared about this. And I met a guy there. He was this young Irish kid from New York, like, I don't know, 20, 22, 23 years old. He was 6'5", overweight. It was summer. He was sweating. He was just miserable, and he was pretty new. And I shared all of that, and I came back the next week, and I saw him, and I said, John, you're still here? He says, yeah, I heard this guy share, and his wife got pregnant with someone else's kid. His TV fell on his Martin guitar, and his dog was eaten by coyotes. If that fucker can stay sober, shit, so can I. And I said, yeah, that was me. And it was just one of those moments of just uh, once again grace, where everything we go through counts somewhere, whether we know it or not. But going through all of this, I really got to the place where I had to just say, I was out of ideas as to what was supposed to make it okay for me to be alive. And I meditated every day. I prayed every day. I did all this stuff. I was working a program. And I just finally said, you know what? If if I haven't fixed it by now, it ain't gonna get fixed. And I quit. I give up. I wanted to leave the program, but I also was just gonna say I had this figure in my mind. I said, you got about 70% of a life back. That's gonna have to be enough. And I just quit. And a couple of weeks later, I learned a meditation practice that changed things for me, and changed things by giving me an experience, absolutely undeniably, of me being here and all my thoughts and feelings being over here. And that's a spiritual awakening. I awoke to what I am that is other than all of the garbage. I awoke to the spirit of what I am, the essence of what I am, the thing that is irreducible about what I am. And I started to have the experience that is talked about in the literature. I started to have the experience of feeling myself deeply connected in my small self. And I realized that up to that point, I looked inside in meditation, and all I could see was my thoughts and my feelings. And my thoughts were always negative, and my feelings were always uncomfortable or quote unquote bad. And that means I was constantly trying to change what I was thinking and change how I was feeling in order to feel good and in order to have happy thoughts. And it's not possible. You can do all the positive thinking you want, but it's like 15% of my mind is the part of it I see. It's like an iceberg. It's the part that's underneath that's going to do all the damage when the Titanic comes along. And I wasn't able to change anything. But when I had the experience of me being here and all my thoughts and feelings being over here, it didn't matter what my thoughts and feelings were doing or saying to me. I wasn't them. And so I began to build on this truth and began to have the experience that we're meant to have according to the literature. We know that God wants us to be happy, joyous, and free. We absolutely insist on enjoying life. How do you do that? By getting in touch with what you are that is other than the place where my alcoholism resides, my thoughts and my feelings. And then from that place saying, help me to make a good choice, help me to move in a direction, help me to be of service, help me to do something other than try to get enough to feel okay. And I started to have that experience, and I started to grow that experience in me, and I started being able to insist on enjoying life. And I've had experiences where I got a job and they said it was, I said, I don't want to work with these people because every time I do, X, Y, and Z occurs. And I told the people who were offering me the job what I just said. And they came back and said, oh, they understand and it's not going to be that. And I said, well, I want proof, send me something in writing. And they said, no, you've got to leave now. And I got there and it was exactly X, Y, and Z, like it was every other time. And I said, I'm going to enjoy this if it kills me. And I did. And it was the beginning of a different way to work for me. And when I go to work now, practicing these principles in all of my affairs, that means that one of the biggest principles that I practice is the principle of unconditional love, the principle of compassion, the principle of service. And what I find, we work the first 9 steps to get free of our garbage. And then my experience of it is that, then we begin to live in steps 10, 11, and 12. And step 10 is on a daily basis, I'm keeping track of how I'm doing and whether I'm headed in the direction of knowing myself more and more as a child of God, or headed in the direction of knowing myself less than as a child of God. And step 11, I pray and meditate every day, twice a day, whether I want to or not, because I need to build my experience of myself as something other than my alcoholism. My alcoholism wants me to stay small and constrained, doesn't care how I feel. It just cares that I keep myself over here to be safe. And if I'm this thing inside that's other than my thoughts and feelings, other than my alcoholism, I don't need to keep myself safe. This thing inside is safety itself. And I can walk into a situation legitimately asking, how can I be of service? And I don't have to ask the situation. I ask God inside, show me how to be of service. And then I pay attention to the situation, to the people I'm with. And I let whatever wants to come out of me, because it's not my business anymore. Step 12, it's my job to show up and be of service. And I do this in my life today, and it just keeps getting better and better and better. I know myself these days as an asset in the lives of the people I'm with. And I came in here, as I said, I didn't belong anywhere, and I certainly didn't see myself as an asset. I saw myself as a drag, and I thought, if I did enough for you and did it right and made you think of me in a certain way, then I might get a tidbit of love from you, and that will be enough to, keep me alive. I don't need anything from you today. I don't need anything from the world today. I like getting in the world. I like having a good life, but I don't need it to be okay. What I require is, on a daily basis, getting in touch with this underlying truth of life that is the truth of me, and then learning more and more how to apply that truth in my day-to-day living. learning more and more how to be an expression of God. Because, this, I was at a book study this morning. I'm 40 years sober. This is my second meeting today. It's like some people would say, some people do say that's extreme. But apparently it's what I need. But in our big book, page 53, it says, when we became alcoholics, crushed by a self-imposed crisis we could not postpone or evade, we had to fearlessly face the proposition that either God is everything or else he is nothing. God either is or he isn't. What was our choice to be? That's unambiguous. Either God is or God isn't. And if God is, then God is everything. My alcoholism will insist on saying, yep, that's true, except for you. And it will it will cause me to see only those thoughts that tell me you're bad, you're wrong, you don't belong, and here's why. And here's all the stories. My job is to do the work that I can do to get beyond the stories, to get in touch with what I am that is not my alcoholism. To know that that thing that I'm getting in touch with is at one with this greater thing, and to do the work to know that what this greater thing wants is nothing but my happiness, nothing but my capacity to live a full and decent and joyful existence. And it wants to love through me. And it wants to bring light to the world through me. Not in some grandiose fashion, but that's the only reason it made itself into all of this, is to have the opportunity to fall into darkness and then bring light to that darkness. That's my understanding of life. That's my understanding of God. That's my understanding of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. We are the lucky ones who fall into darkness so terribly and so deeply and so irrevocably, I never know how to say that word, that we have to reach out for help. And we're all people who would rather chew off our own ankles than ask for help. But we're so fortunate to fall into the darkness so deeply that we finally have to reach out for help. And when we do, we start down this path that leads us more and more in the direction of, you're meant to be the light. You're meant to know yourself as the light. You're meant to offer yourself to the world as the light. And you're meant to bring that light to your fellows so that they can start seeing themselves as the light too. And one of my sponsees, Farhad, asked if he could throw a party for me for my 40th AA birthday. And it was the last thing I wanted to do. But I realized that being of service was to let him be of service to me. I said, okay, sure. Let's do that. Let's do that party thing. And they said, okay. So, another friend said, you need to use Evite. And I did it. And I just started inviting the people who, who have had an impact on my life. And, it went from 50 to 100 to 150 to 200 people. And poor Farhad just kept, like having to change the venue. And yet he rolled with it, and I rolled with it. And we finally had this party on Saturday, and I thanked Farhad, and I told everyone this thing about Farhad that no one here knows. Farhad is from Iran, and he got sober here and 39 years ago. And 39 years ago, after he was a couple months sober, a man moved here who didn't speak English, so they started a Farsi-speaking meeting in Beverly Hills, and 3 or 4 guys. And out of that meeting grew the idea of translating the big book so that their fellow could read along with them. And they translated the whole big book into Farsi. And today, there are over 700,000 sober women and men in Iran because of that little meeting where they were just trying to be of service and trying to stay sober one more day. And the gift, and Farhad goes to, Iran, and he has 20,000 people show up to hear him speak, and he's a rock star. And here he goes to a meeting, and his head tells him the same thing my head tells me, which is, you don't belong here. You're not a part of this. You're unworthy. You don't deserve love. You don't deserve happiness. You don't deserve to feel like you belong. And AA gives us all this place to continue to show up and offer ourselves the opportunity to prove that voice wrong and to behave from something other than that voice. And, I'm here to tell you that 40 years is not enough to make that voice go away, but the voice of and the permission to be alive and to be full and to offer is so much stronger than that voice most of the time. And my willingness to listen to the voice of yes is so much greater than it ever has been before. And it continues to grow. And, at this point in my life, the one thing about staying sober for 40 years is you end up being old. And there's the years ahead of you are by definition fewer than the years behind you. And I see the years ahead of me as just opportunity to see how big can this thing get? How much does God want to do through me, and how much can I challenge myself to continue offering to the world and not taking it personally? And AA, as my dear sister Bird says, AA offers me a design for living I can't possibly outgrow. And, I love AA. I love you whether you want me to or not. And thanks so much for listening.